Alright, so in the long array of really, really popular miniseries we've been getting this year, we already talked about The White Lotus and we talked about WandaVision and stuff like that. In the middle of those, we had Mare of Easttown, which it took me a minute to even gravitate towards because I honestly had no idea what I saw it as an option on HBO Max for a while, and I didn't really look at the picture. I just knew it was Kate Winslet and I knew what the title was. And for some reason, just the idea of that sounded like some sort of period drama to me, which is something I'm just not interested in at all. And then a friend just happened to tell me, like, she asked me, like, are you watching it? And then when she explained kind of what it was, I was like, oh, I did not know that's what that was at all. This whole idea that it's basically one of those, it's almost like a Dennis Lehane kind of thing, where it's this sort of character-driven crime story, but it's an original work, but it has the feel of like a novel, like a Dennis Lehane novel or something like that. And then I immediately got interested, so, and then I checked it out, and yeah, much like The White Lotus, the episodes went pretty quickly, which is unusual for me. I usually can only do like 2 episodes of a show at a time before I have to give it a break or something, but, yeah, the miniseries we've been getting this year, in particular, are really standing out in a really interesting way, and obviously this is no exception, and it's clear to see why these things have gotten as popular as they have. There's a lot of stuff where you get like maybe 1 or 2 episodes in and you're like, I don't get the hype, and then you leave it, which is me a lot of the time, but thankfully we've had a lot of luck this year, and of course, much like The White Lotus, we're going to be going into the whole spoiler territory. We're going to go all the way to the end, so, like I said, I'll put that in the title, but just to be clear on all levels, that we are kind of going into everything, so there's that. So, going into it is where our director is Craig Zogel, who did Compliance, and our writer is Brad Inglesby, who did, like, Out of the Furnace, and most recently The Way Back, the Ben Affleck movie. And of course I absolutely love Out of the Furnace, and I can get certain vibes of that here, so that's something that's kind of immediately pulling me in. Now, it is to my understanding that Gavin O'Connor is listed as like the executive producer or something, and it is to my understanding that he was the original director, and then like some things fell through or something, and I think reshoots had to happen or something like that. All this stuff I heard was very vague. So if there's anything that seemed kind of disjointed, it was probably lost in that whole drama. But I don't really get that vibe until the really later episodes. That stuff almost kind of starts to feel a bit disjointed, but we'll get there. But in the meantime, obviously front and center in this whole thing is this Kate Winslet performance where she's like, it often feels like overkill when you talk about like an actor disappearing into a role or something like that. But I mean, when you see like how completely unglamorous this is and all of the really dark and tragic places that this character's coming from, you do kind of forget, like somehow, some way, you actually kind of forget that you're watching Kate Winslet. Like going back to like Titanic and Sense and Sensibility and stuff like that, that person is not anywhere to be found in Mare, which is amazing. And I think it's the way the town is established has a lot to do with this. The whole thing, how we have the disappearance of Katie, and how that's just completely this dark cloud that's just looming over everything. And then you've got this whole thing, and the fact that everybody puts the blame on her for that, because she is in charge of this investigation and it has not gone anywhere. And the thing about that also is the whole idea of not only is that bringing her down, and it's like, when you see all the stuff around town that's bringing her down, it's almost an afterthought that she has a child that has committed suicide. And as big of an emotional factor as that is, like I said, as far as establishing the town goes, because here's the thing, is I don't want to seem like I don't have empathy for all these people, and it's clear there's a lot of tension in this town, because everybody's worried, there's so many concerned parents and all that other stuff. But honestly, I found it a bit of a struggle to get through these first couple of episodes, because I basically felt like the show should have been called Kate Winslet versus Degenerates. Like, this Like the whole idea of setting up this small town vibe, and yes, there's been tragedy in this town and all that, but and all these different people are coming from all these different places emotionally and in their lives, but this town is full of insufferable people that seem to hate in general for all the wrong reasons. And Mare is right in the middle of that. And it's like, it's one of those cases where it does have a real feel, where it's like Mare has her own tragedies in her life. And while that's terrible, she's surrounded by people where it's like, well, it doesn't matter what tragedies you've had. I have my own tragedies, and you are terrible because you are not doing anything to fix my tragedies. And it feels like that's the whole, and the whole way they set that up, as far as Mare being the center of this, is this whole idea of she's otherwise this town hero because of like one basketball game where she was the star player, and this has carried on through her whole life. And then there's just this very, very cruel irony in the first episode when they're having a whole like reunion because of this game, this big triumphant game where she scored the winning shot and was the town hero. And earlier in the episode, she had been involved in a foot chase and injured like her leg, and so she has to come out on the basketball court to this cheering crowd that's cheering for what an amazing athlete she was back in the day, and she's like limping, and just that in itself just shows just the whole cruel nature that has gotten Mare to the places in her life that she's at now. And the way Winslet's able to embody that, not just have like all this heaviness on her, but the fact that she's able to do it without ever overplaying it. Like there's even a point in time where she eventually starts seeing like a therapist, and it's like at this point you think, oh, these are going to be the really, really big scenes. And while as far as development goes, they are, like I said, she never overplays really anything. And it's insane how much of a grasp she had on like this whole idea of being able to stay level as far as what we saw, and the fact that there's even comedic moments in here that don't feel out of place. Like there's the whole moment when she goes to the party for Guy Pearce, and she has the duck liver pate, and there's this whole seemingly out of place comedic sequence where she puts it in her mouth and realizes that she hates it, and she waits for nobody to be around. She watches people walk by and waits for them to leave and be out of sight before she spits it out, and then actually tries to hide it in the couch. And it's like just moments like that seem like they would stick out in this really weird way, but there's still also like this real factor that they keep bringing in. Another one of those comedic moments is when it's revealed that her mom had an affair, and this is revealed in public, and the drive home where she has this, the way Winslet laughs in this scene, because not only is it like just real in general and it feels like real between the characters and like a real moment between them, and it's this nice, contrast to what's been going on. What's also interesting is this scene happens in what's probably the darkest episode. And before it gets to that point. So it's like this sort of perfect middle ground of levity that they find here. And the fact that we don't really see her character have moments like this because there's so much tragedy everywhere and there's so much on her shoulders all the time, constantly. And the whole town is just bearing down on her. And so moments like that really break the tension in a really nice way. And the fact that they're not too... I could see somebody being... Like, another writer would be too afraid that their material is too dark and try to do those breaks too much. But the fact that we just have those every now and then, like, maybe it'd be generous to say every other episode. It's probably even less than that. But when they come, they have much more of a feeling behind them because there's so much darkness and tragedy around everything else in town. But yeah, and then of course, that's kind of a continuous thing throughout also, are these sort of light interactions she has with her mom, who is Jean Smart, an amazing Jean Smart, with her game that she's obsessed with, and doing that real grandmotherly role so authentically. And then the whole interactions with Guy Pearce, now she's so excited about him. Like there's a lot of stuff that Jean Smart has to do, and that particular balance, like I said, that she finds in her own performance more so than the show even does itself, which is really great. But talking about the idea of Kate Winslet versus degenerates basically being the theme here, to me anyway. Um, yeah, and I guess it's a nice contrast when you think about the idea of like small towns where everybody knows everybody. You get the sense of like a friendly vibe, like some sort of Mayberry vibe or something. But then there's also the idea of you can be completely trapped with these people. It's like these are the people that you see every day, and there could be a lot of connections and relationships and all that stuff. But when things go dark, like I said, you're still stuck, and that's where Mare is throughout this story. Um, and what's really interesting is the way they kind of like sort of establish that community where you have like people gossiping, and there's a lot of people around town with all their different problems, and obviously with this being a murder mystery setup, a lot of it feels like it's kind of doing the everybody's a red herring kind of thing, where it's like they set up with the girl and her drug addict brother, that doesn't really seem to go anywhere, and the whole prowler aspect, which obviously does eventually come back into play, but there's a lot of stuff being thrown out. It's like there's a lot of characters to keep up with. I'm still not entirely sure, even now, having seen the whole show. There's still some character relationships where I'm thinking like, well, how is this person connected to this person again, and how is this person related? Is this person related to this person? I'm still having questions about that. So I don't know that they established that as well as they could have. They throw, especially at the start, like in the first episode, they throw a lot of characters at us, and they're very vague about how they connect. And in a show like this, where you have 7 episodes to draw it out, your mind might think, like I was thinking, like, well, they'll establish that a little more. Like we'll just like for now, it's a little confusing, but once it plays out, I'll know who's who eventually. Mostly yes, but it took a long, long time. Like it was, there were some cases where in episode 6 out of 7, I was going like, oh, that's how this person relates to these people. Okay, it was, it's a lot, and they probably could have done that a bit more clearly. But I mean, you also risk doing too much exposition if you have to deal with that. But it's so they handle it fine, but I feel like they could have been just a little more clear about it. Especially since there's characters here that seem almost pointless, like Guy Pearce. Like it feels like the whole thing with Guy Pearce was, I kept thinking like, I mean he's got to be involved in some way because he's new in town, and he's Guy Pearce, and he's done the twist villain a number of times now, as obvious as it seems. But I mean, why else would Guy Pearce be in this part? He's not just going to be the random love interest. And then as it got closer and closer to the end, I was thinking, well, maybe he did do Mildred Pierce with Kate Winslet. Maybe this was like a favor or something. Or maybe it was the idea of, hey, if we cast Guy Pearce in this part, it'll get people constantly thinking that it's something that it isn't, which goes along with the whole everything's a red herring vibe. Which can get a bit tiresome. Like it almost felt like they got a bit too reliant on the whole thing of make everybody look suspicious at one time or another. Because it's another one of those cases where anybody that looks suspicious too early is clearly not it. Like even the stuff that looks super super incriminating, like the deacon dropping the bike in the water. It was like, oh, that's really really incriminating, but this is too early. There's something more to it than that. He's not guilty. And there's a lot of that where you can do that. And it doesn't even do the clever thing where it's like convince you that it's somebody early on, but you're like, oh no, it's clearly not them because it's too early, and then circle back around and it actually is that person. No, you can literally just check characters off until we get to the guilty person, and that's what it's doing the whole... Like, every episode gives you a person to, like, check off the list, which is nice and organized, but after a while it gets to... Yeah, the character of Billy in particular was kind of taking me out of feeling invested in it much, because it was like after it got late enough, like we had crossed the path where we had crossed that line where it was like, okay, anybody that looks guilty now could probably be guilty. We're late enough into it now, and they do everything they can making Billy look really guilty, and it's like he's acting really erratic. A little bit, and then that gets more and more as it goes on. But like even that first time, it's like, well, he's probably involved in some way. And I actually started to get disinterested in the rest of it because it started to feel so obvious that it would have been Billy, and the way it started headed to that direction all the way into the opening of the last episode, it was kind of starting to lose me. But then it got to that whole point where it seems like we've reached a climax, and the episode has like 50 minutes left, and so the structure here is not doing the mystery element any favor. So I guess it's just a matter of if you're here for the mystery element or you're here for the character. Obviously, most people would be here for both, and you would hope there's a balance of that. And for the most part, there is a balance of that. But, like I was saying, as far as there being a mystery element here, and the fact that almost every character is unlikable at some point. Like, and I guess it's the kind of thing where you can look at Mare, and we see all the different facets of Mare because Mare is at the center of this. And it's like, you see all these characters that you just want to punch so hard in the face, many of them, and you're wondering, like, oh, if this person got the same amount of focus that Mare did, would we see, like, oh, I see where they're coming from and why they're like this. Because the way Winslet plays Mare, it's able to, like she has, like, this sort of worn-down quality to her, and this coldness to her, and this bitterness to her, but that's never really unappealing, because we always see where she's coming from and what it is she's dealing with. But when you look at some of these other characters, there is 10 minutes in, there is a character I already despise. When we first saw Dylan, I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna really fucking hate this guy. I just have a feeling. And the way he was being all dismissive of her. And then Brianna. I don't think I've hated a character as much as I've hated Brianna since Lester Nygaard. Like, I've never wanted to see a character get what's coming to them so much, which of course is very unsatisfying because nothing really happens to Brianna. We get that nice moment when it's like we have all these people that hated her for like these obvious reasons like them, and the fact that when we go see her, they introduce her dad Kenny, who's another person we hate right away, because like watching this, it's so tragic for Erin how it seemed like there was nothing wrong with her at all. Like, she was just doing her best and trying to live her life, and for some reason, everybody in this town fucking hated her for seemingly existing. And I was watching the first episode, and I didn't know where it was going, so I was like, please don't let her be the one that dies. Like, obviously this is going some murder mystery, and I was like, please don't let her be the one that dies. And when she was, it was like, oh, I fucking hate this town. It's like, whoever's guilty, the town itself did this. And then Kenny wins you over in the second episode after he blew up at her. And it's like when he says, like, Dylan and Brianna, and it's like, I don't know if you have the evidence, I don't know if they're completely guilty, but they did something, so do something about them. And seeing, the whole, like, coldness in Mare, where, like, she has to come in, and everybody's like, oh, look, it's Mare, it's the town hero. She's like, I have to arrest your daughter in public. And I'm making a statement by doing this. Like, I want them to watch this happen, because we have the footage of Brianna assaulting her. And it's... and so there's some sort of, what's the word? It's rewarding to watch that happen. But as we go on, obviously things are looking way too obvious at the start, so we know more things are going to unravel. But it does have these moments. The show has this way of doing things, like right at the end, where you're not quite sure. It makes them a little more unpredictable when it seems like, oh, this is, the method to the show's madness or whatever. We'll get moments like at the end of the second episode, when Kenny picks up Dylan, or Kenny's in the back of Dylan's car, and then they drive off. And it's like, I had assumed that would be the last time we'd see them for that episode. It was kind of a cliffhanger for them, and then we'd see where that went in the third episode. But no, the second episode keeps going, and he takes him in the middle of nowhere and shoots him. And it's... and it's cases like that where it's like, alright, let's see what all the show's doing, what all directions it can go. Like I said, some of these things don't quite live up to what it seems like they're setting up. But that also kind of goes into the whole unpredictable nature of it, of convince you it's going in one direction and then take another turn. And it's like in cases like that, like with the case of, you know, him taking Dylan out and shooting him and Dylan appearing dead at the end of the episode and then it taking a different turn, is the kind of predictable that we want. Not necessarily the everybody that looks suspicious is clearly not eventually going to be like bringing Frank into it. David Demon and Mare's ex. Like as soon as he mentioned having Aaron in class, it's like, oh, that's super suspicious, and you hear about, you know, student-teacher relationships and all that kind of shady shit. And then they immediately kind of say, take us in a direction with that. But once again, we kind of know that it's way too early for Frank to have really been involved in the murder, so it's probably not going to be him, but we can see how these play out. But that's kind of where the series might be at its weakest, is when it's like, we get the sense that somebody's probably not guilty, so we just kind of have to wait for the rest of the characters to figure that out. Because like I said, it's way too early in the series. But something that adds, while Mare is certainly a great character by herself and could have easily carried a show by herself, there is a certain spark that comes in that adds even more when we introduce Evan Peters in the second episode. In the way that he's basically like the opposite of Mare in a lot of ways, like whether it be personality or his approach or whatever, and how he's maybe not as seasoned. And then the dynamic there is really great to watch, especially the way he's like the moment when he like gets her to finally shake hands and stuff like that. And then the direction they take him, where we start to kind of slowly learn things about him. Zabel was one of my favorite characters to kind of see unravel here, which makes the fifth episode all the more surprising and tragic. But and I kind of kept thinking also, like, and that's the thing too with this whole murder mystery element, is it's crazy the theories your mind will come up with that are really outlandish but seem plausible in the moment. So I was on this whole thing for a little bit about how we don't really see anybody that Zabel is connected to professionally. He just kind of shows up and he says, I'm this person that I sent over to help. And I started getting in my head like this whole thing of like maybe Zabel was another person and this was not him. And he had somehow gotten himself into this place of Zabel and was investigating potentially his own crime. Something very outlandish like that. When it's clearly eventually going to be much simpler. But that's also the fun of these shows also, is where the ridiculous places your mind will go trying to figure out what's happening here and trying to be ahead of it. Like I was saying, sometimes it's much simpler than that, which is one thing you can probably say about where we ultimately end up. But as far as, like I said, as far as like it feeling like a lived-in world is something that you would think would kind of, as far as the murder mystery element, you would think there wouldn't, eventually the writer would lose their way, is what usually happens, where you want to do the character thing, but you also want to do the, you know, crime thriller thing. And is one eventually going to start outweighing the other? And there is quite a good balance there. There are some cases where we get maybe a little bit Silence of the Lambs. There's like multiple scenes where Mare almost feels like a later years Clarice, like a much more seasoned Clarice. Especially the big scene at the end of episode 5 was very going to Buffalo Bill's house kind of thing. But still establishing just how lived in the world is, they were able to do nicely with this and kind of go back and forth, and sometimes mix them together a little bit to add, like, the tension that they add, where it's like, I don't even really want to go into Brianna's dad, and all the shit he was starting, and how you know, obvious he was starting to look for a minute. But it's like, or it's one of those cases where you can do like some really bad shit, and then all you have to do is say you're sorry. It's like I was really hoping when he said, when, you know, I think it was after she found Katie, and he's like, you know, hey man, I'm really sorry about all that stuff, and Mare didn't say anything because she's stoic and that's her character, but I just really wanted her to say, don't be sorry, I just fixed my fucking window that you broke. But yeah, the way they establish everything and also build the tension, where it's like when like I said, everything feels like it's bearing down on Mare when she walks into the convenience store, and like Dawn is there, and of course Dawn's always putting the pressure on her about Katie, and then she's got Brianna's dad coming from the other side, and she just feels trapped. And there's a similar scene also, um, with Dylan, when it's like we see like before we've really established who like works where and which characters we've met before are going to be their placement in the town. There's the scene where we follow Dylan in the convenience store right before he gets taken by Kenny, and that's when we first see I think that Dawn's the cashier. And it's like just giving that whole lived-in quality of like, hey, I know that person, and stuff like that. Yeah, like I said, even if these characters can be infuriating most of the time, they do very well of establishing that community, and then the way they, like I was talking about the stuff with like Brianna's dad, and then the Kenny stuff, how they work the tension into this established world and how they've built it. It's something that it does really well, and I think that's where we find the balance of being able to do the character work and the thriller stuff without one being overpowered by the other. Um, and as far as I guess getting to the oh no, one more thing I wanted to bring up about the death of Zabel was I do really like that it could have been very easy to sort of write his character off entirely, like once he's killed, just not deal with it. But episode 6, I felt like dealt with that in a really good way. Um, where we see how there's like a certain mourning throughout that episode, and then there's this really great moment when she goes to see his mom, and that obviously doesn't get the outcome that she was expecting. It's like you when she first gets there, you get the idea that the scene is going to be some emotional connection between the two of them, but then like as Mara's talking and his mom is still not saying anything, that's when you kind of get the idea that might go south. And the moment that I loved in there that they did was, if I remember correctly, it's really specific, so I could be something could contradict this, but I'm thinking the whole show up to this point, she has only called him by his last name. She has only called him Zabel, and then when she's talking to his mom and she says, "I'm sorry about Colin," that's like the only time she calls him by his first name. And like there's something like really human about that. Like it was always a professional thing, even when they were in their case. He clearly had something for her, and the whole kiss scene and stuff like that, which was really just his send off. Like I felt like in the back of my mind, I kind of knew that his death was like right around the corner after that. But still, that real moment of humanity when she finally calls him by his first name after he's already gone, and to his mother, um, is just there's always like a new layer to Mare from each episode, and that's one that really stuck out to me. So, talking about the way continuing on this thing about how these dramatic character moments will seep into the thriller aspect of it. Here is the whole thing about when we get to who our guilty party is. And it's funny. It felt like I kind of had a Dennis Lehane vibe the whole time, since we're basically getting something very akin to the ending of Mystic River, where it was just a kid doing something stupid, which, in a sense, is unsatisfying. But I do feel like it's one of those. This is one of those shows where it's like they build up so much that it could be anybody, and your mind is going to all those different places. Like my whole thing about Zabel not being who he says he is and stuff like that. Um, it's almost inevitable when you set up that many red herrings that whoever it eventually is going to seem underwhelming. Just like how I was thinking, like if it had ended up being Billy and that ended up being right, that would have been underwhelming because it would have just felt obvious by that point. Like I said, these shows just do so much and get your mind working so much that eventually it's just going to be like, oh, so it's that, and then you just kind of move it. Like it's not going to be. It's going to be the journey that sticks with you, not what the climax was and what the reveal ultimately was. Um, but it's so as far as it being revealed to be this kid who was just really upset that his father was essentially grooming Aaron, but he took that as Aaron was breaking apart their family, and he recklessly took a gun that was loaded to supposedly scare her. That's very, very much the Mystic River ending. Um, there's a lot of things. I was talking before, there's a reason I mentioned it, about the whole idea that people in this show get off way too light. Like, the consequences of the actions of these people are way, way too light. So, not only do we have a non-confrontation with Brianna's dad for being as threatening as he was, whether he was guilty of this or not, we have the whole idea of... I guess we haven't mentioned Lori yet. Julianne Nicholson, who I love, who I've always loved. And she clearly she seems like she's just got a normal part here. But that was one of those cases where I was kind of looking at Lori else because I was like, Julianne Nicholson has more to do here, I feel like. It's like she's just kind of like the best friend character or something. And it's like there's got to be something that makes her part meatier, and sure enough, it gets here. And while I do understand. There's also, keeping on the lane, there's also something very Gone Baby Gone here about the whole moral dilemma. The whole idea of, do you turn the person in or do you not? And I mean, it's perfectly clear here that something has to be done with this kid. This kid has to be caught. And the fact that Lori resents this because now her whole family is gone. Because her husband's going to be in prison and her son as well. But the thing here is that I really don't care for how this show really shortchanged Aaron as a character the whole time. From the first episode to the last episode. The whole middle portion is like, oh, we've got to find the evil person that killed Aaron. But the last episode treats it so lightly. Like, he's just like, we get this kid, and yes, he's a kid, and he's going through this whole terrible family thing. But I mean, a lot of people, as kids, have these dramatic moments in their family, and somebody might get in between and break up the family, but I think a lot of kids don't recklessly grab a loaded gun and go out into the woods with somebody. With intent to scare them nearly to death, or in this case, actually to death. So, this whole thing of, oh, he's just a kid, and oh, it was just, you know, you have to have empathy because, you know, his family was being torn apart. And so we get the scene where he's in, like, where he's being held, and it's like, oh, hey, here's your sister, and here's this, look, we're having really, you know, happy moments with this kid, while Aaron is dead. And will always be dead, and was brutally killed, humiliatingly killed after having her clothes taken off of her to make it look like it was something it wasn't. But yeah, let's make sure this kid's comfortable in prison. And then the whole thing where we have to empathize with Lori, and because she's so, like, how could Mare do this? Like, this is the, it always comes back to, how could Mare do this to us? When all Mare has ever done is her fucking job. But I get why we have this moment. Why this moment between the two of them. The idea that they've both lost a son. You know, like, the loss is there between the two of them. But it's... And the thing, talking about all the characters getting off light, Lori got off way too light. I actually had to look up. Like, I literally Googled... Mare of Easttown, why is Lori not in prison? And there were actual answers. And there was something about how it would have been like, it would have been less work or something, or it would have been, I don't know, something that I didn't find satisfying. And it's like there's so much culpability here that hardly anybody is seeing, and there's being any emphasis on. And it's like, I get we're doing the whole small town thing, but this whole story is way too easy on these characters, I feel like. And except Aaron. Erin was apparently just the bane of everybody's existence for living, and then when she died, it was like, oh, we'll get better. So, I don't know. So I'm not. I really don't know. Like, it's a very strong show as a whole, but episode 7 is, I don't know, because there's a whole lot of things here. Because okay, I get the Guy Pearce thing, because it's like, you know, if it wasn't, maybe it was misdirection for casting Guy Pearce, or it was just a favor to Winslet or something. It could have been. Oh no! I believe he was supposed to be another actor, is what I ended up looking up. And then he had to like replace him at the last minute. So yeah, so we get the whole Guy Pearce thing. So that's, it felt like open ended when he was just leaving, but it's like, okay, we get that. But there's no payoff for Kenny, which I thought was weird. Like, I was imagining he would be one of the first person we would come back to when the mystery was solved. And if I remember correctly, we just kind of never see him again. And then we get this stuff like Siobhan's love story. Is something just kind of, and that's one of those things where you could like say maybe they're just establishing the world and they're building the characters and all this stuff. But there's a lot of stuff that feels like it was directionless at the end of the day, and not even necessarily just for like red herring purposes, but just like I said, I get that it was maybe building character, but maybe we had like one too many characters. Like, it's nice that we had a balance here and we had a community that was established and they had built a world. But it's still probably a world that could have been shaved down just a little bit, at least as far as, you know, story purposes go. Or people that didn't necessarily, that got more emphasis that ended up not needing it. Because it didn't really add much of anything. So, and obviously Siobhan, I guess, plays a big part in the whole idea of the whole family having to move on from the suicide, but there's a lot in here that probably doesn't, and I think that sticks out a lot with the whole idea of, I was still, maybe this is just a me thing, but the whole idea of still feeling it a bit vague to some of the relationships and how people connected here. But I don't want to, like, the whole show as a whole is very, very strong and tells a really good story, and the way they balance the genre with the characters is something really crucial that they pulled off in a way that not many shows probably could have. And like I said, having Mare at the center of it and this Winslow performance is what really keeps it going. But there's a lot that's going to be really frustrating about it also. Some of it, much of it intentional. Like I felt like there were ways that I felt about the characters where I felt like that was kind of the way I was supposed to feel. But there were other cases where it was like, it's very unsatisfying how we finish up some of these characters, and how some of these characters should be facing much more consequences, and they're asking a lot with how much they're asking us to empathize with certain characters, and to the extent that they're asking us to do that. And mine only goes so far for some of these people, but I said maybe that's the intention, but I don't know. I feel like I think we're really supposed to care about a lot of the people that I don't give a fuck about, and if anything, I wish we had seen worse outcomes for. Fucking Brianna got off way too fucking light. Lori got off way too light. I don't know. But overall, it is a very strong story and a strong show, and I can see where its popularity has come from. And I know Winslet has been talking to Inglesby about, like, expanding the story. And that's kind of getting frustrating, too. It's almost like we're kind of losing the art of the miniseries, because we saw with, like, Big Little Lies and The White Lotus and this, and Fargo and others, where it's like, as good as these shows are, it is, like, what happened to just the open and closed story? Like almost every miniseries eventually becomes a series now. It's almost like miniseries are starting to become pilots, only just pilot seasons as opposed to pilot episodes. And it's like, just tell a story. Just close it up. We don't need, I don't need to see Mare get emotionally tortured anymore by this horrible, horrible town and its horrible, horrible people. But it felt like it felt like the concept of Dogville after a while. Which is really funny because Kate Winslet was in a movie called The Dressmaker, which also had quite a Dogville kind of vibe to it, as far as one person in the middle of this terrible, horrible town and its terrible people. Now, if this show had ended the way that Dogville ends, maybe that's overkill. but maybe it also would have been a bit more satisfying than what we got. But so, if you've seen Dogville, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But maybe that's overkill. So I'm just gonna. Before I start to turn on the show, I'm gonna go ahead and stop here, because it obviously very well crafted, very well written, great world, blending of genres. It's all great. Just a little unsatisfying in cases, but I'm gonna go ahead and leave this here. At the time I'm shooting this, the Emmys haven't happened yet, but I'm assuming this is gonna do very well. I think Winslet's up against Anya Taylor-Joy, but hopefully Winslet takes it. She's also up against Olsen, so I'll probably take either of them. I think Evan Peters is up, which would be really cool, though he's up against the Hamilton guys. But we'll see, and I think Julianne Nicholson and maybe Jean Smart as well is up. I don't quite remember, because I don't pay near as much attention to the Emmys as I do the other award shows, but I would like to think this will do really well, but we'll see. Everybody's all up in arms with the Queen's Gambit too, but maybe with this being kind of the new hip thing, it'll get bumped out, and Mare of Easttown will be successful, so we'll see. The next thing we're going to do, I think we're going to be done with TV until, I'll probably touch on Scenes from a Marriage with Oscar Isaac and Chastain, the HBO Max's, I'm guessing, a remake of the Bergman movie / series. So that should be interesting, and then we'll keep doing reviews and verses and all this other stuff we've been talking about, and then all the horror stuff in October. Just a whole bunch of stuff all the time for the next month and a half. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.